We're recording now. Hello, this is Simon Partridge for Dover Community Radio. This is the Dr. David Evans interview. We're here to talk about a new addition to our knowledge about the nature of language in the form of a book about discourse, which sets together several papers around the subject, edited by Dr. David Evans, a fellow of the Hope University in Liverpool, who now resides in Dover. What exactly is the state of modern linguistics in terms our listeners would understand?
Well, Simon, I think in the book we're talking about how language, the use of language, creates or builds the identity of individuals. You know, in a sense, we are the language we use. So we build ourselves or construct ourselves through our daily use of language. That's the best I think I can say, the most accessible way of expressing it.
You just said to me earlier that you saw this book as an item of history, and that language is one feature of the main cultural identity.
Yeah, I don't think you can say that language is everything. Language and the wider discourse of communication, signs and gesture are a big feature of social life. Where would we be without language? That's the main phenomenon that divides us from the animal kingdom, our advanced use of language, and it pushes our way of thinking to a higher order of thought. So language is very important in every aspect of life. But there are aspects of life where language isn't used so much as other forms of non-verbal communication, signs and gestures and so on. So language in terms of sentences and words is not everything in communication. There are other forms of communication. The way someone dresses, for example, is a way of communicating. The way you conduct yourself, and the way you walk, and the way you have your hair done communicates something about you. So communication goes beyond words and phrases.
Do you believe language has a spiritual identity?
I do. I think there are, for example, in the Catholic world, you have a phenomenon such as the Latin Mass. That obviously carries a meaning for some people. For some people who carries a spirituality, is heavily weighted in spiritual terms for some people. The fact that language is used from thousands of years ago, that touches the past and carries a great deal of weight. So yes, language can be used in spiritual ways. We look at the King James Bible. That carries a certain weight because it's an old language. It carries more meaning than using everyday language. So yeah, language is very important for spirituality.
And what linguistic theorists do you follow?
Well, in the book, I do look at Chomsky because his position is that we all have an innate language faculty within the mind, or within the mind/brain.
Yeah.
That we have an innate grammar, if you like, within us. So it's very much an internal model for language. But I also look at the more social constructions of language, like Halliday, who thinks that language and grammar doesn't originate in the brain, it originates out in society, between the interactions of people. So they're the two models that I look at in the book, and I think I'm somewhere in between them. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think there's a lot of language in that is innate, and there's a lot about language that is out in the world.
Are those the two modern fathers of linguistics?
I think when we look at formal linguistics, modern formal linguistics, Chomsky is the father of modern formal linguistics. If we look at systems linguistics in the interactions of social world, Halliday is a big character. But the subject of linguistics itself comes from a Swiss philosopher called de Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure, who wrote the course of general linguistics in 1916, and he's acknowledged to be the father of modern linguistics. He's got linguistics going as a science in its own right.
Do you think language is cultural or just a hyper-metaphor?
Well, I think it's cultural. I think there are two things. One, there is the innateness of grammar, which is the Chomsky version of grammar, which I think has a lot of credibility. That there is something within us that has a propensity to learn language. You note that you can note that children learn language very quickly. They learn their language within the first few years of life. So that is biological. So there is a biological element to language. But I think when it comes to the way language is spoken generally, in all the vocabulary, in all the richness of words, it's very cultural. It's very cultural. Words change in meaning. We have words which mean one thing at one period of time, and then in decades to come, that word will mean something else. That words actually take on different meanings as we go through history.
It is quite difficult to actually analyse and come to some conclusions about where language is coming from. What about Kant, his critique of pure reason, the noumenon? That's another way of looking at the general theorem of language.
Yeah, I think Kant is saying that Kant is. I don't see Kant as being central to language debate. The only thing about Kant is that he says you never really know the world. Kant, you never really know the world as it is. You only ever know the world as it appears to be, as you perceive it.
Through a mirror darkly.
Yeah, so you don't, with Kant, there's no true knowledge of the world. You never get to know things as they really are. You only get to know things as you see them, as they appear to be. So I wouldn't put Kant as a great central figure in language.
Why, David, did you write the book or embark on the subject? Did you just feel this was something you had to write about?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Simon, because I've spent a lot of my life learning languages and teaching languages. My first degree was in French, and I spent a long time teaching French. My second diploma, Spanish Ministry of Education diploma, was in Spanish, obviously Spanish, and so I've taught a lot of Spanish. And I think because I've been learning languages and teaching languages, I eventually got round to becoming interested in language as a phenomenon itself.
That makes it clearer about where you're coming from. Just saying, a lot of books are actually about language, even though they don't think they are, because they are written in language. For example, Descartes, when he said the mind exists because you can reflect on it, that is actually a definition of of how we think and the definition of the notion of language?
Yeah, I think Descartes is a central figure especially in Chomskyan linguistics, because Descartes' position is that we have in the mind an innateness, an innate, if you like, predisposition to know the world. And so Descartes would say that we have the structures of the outside world within our heads, and that's why we can make a connection with the outside world. And so for Descartes, we don't discover the world, we uncover the world. We already know the structures. Now, it works the same way in Chomskyan linguistics. We don't actually learn, Chomsky would say, we don't actually learn language. We learn what we already know. We already have the structures for language in our head, and so therefore we just bring this into being, we bring it into fruition, given the right circumstances. So we already have the program for language within our heads, in the same way that Descartes says we already have the program for knowledge within our heads. So Descartes is quite important in that sort of linguistics.
Why would you advise us to read your book? What sort of area do you be interested in?
Well, I think the idea of firstly, if we go beyond that theoretical section, I think it's important to look at how, firstly, in the theoretical section, how we learn language, how language comes about. But if we go then beyond that theoretical section into the case studies, we look at the way language operates in various places in the world and how it shapes the way people perceive themselves, how it shapes, if you like, identity. So I'm arguing really that language is not the only thing, but language is a major factor in building up identity, in shaping identity. And in the book you see various case studies in various countries of the world where language has helped to construct an identity. Now sometimes it's a language under threat, and it's an identity under threat because it's a marginalised language. It's a language that has been forced out of its position by a major language. And one of the chapters takes an example of China, the Uyghur province of China, where the population there have to speak Mandarin Chinese, and despite the fact they want to speak their own language. So there's a cultural invasion, if you like, of the main Chinese culture, and the Uyghur population feel that they're being dispossessed of their own culture and their own language. So we see instances in the world where language and culture are under threat. So identity is then under threat.
So do governments have a moral imperative to preserve language as the people see it?
Well, I think they do, Simon. I think there is an imperative to preserve cultures, and it's reported that hundreds of languages and therefore cultures die all the time. And each year hundreds of languages are dying. One of the chapters written by Dr. Guillaume of Liverpool University is about the Amazonian tribal languages in Brazil, and the Brazilian government's encouragement for these communities to speak the Amazonian tribal languages in schools, in primary schools, and in local institutions in those areas, and so preserve the culture, preserve the Amazonian Indian culture. So that yes, some governments do that. So it's very important for minority languages such as Welsh to be preserved. And the only way such languages can be preserved is if they are used in schools, primary schools, secondary schools, universities, if they become the medium for communication. In institutions is the only way you can actually preserve those languages. And then also, particularly Welsh, in government. So that's no longer a language that is at risk. But there are many other languages in the world which are at risk.
Do you think knowing how different all these languages are says something about the nature of language and identity? We've all got the same identity, and the discourse is similar, but the actual form in which it comes is quite different, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with you there, Simon. The thing with language, this language has a double-edged sword. There's a sameness in language, and that's where Chomsky comes in, where he says that Chomsky talks about universal grammar. Universal grammar says that, argues that all languages have the same grammar. So there is a sameness, no matter what the language. There is an underlying grammar. And it doesn't matter if the word order is different, whether it's subject, verb, object, or object, verb, subject. The main thing is that the grammar underlying it is the same. So there's a sameness, but there's also, we use words differently, and words evolve over time in different places. So there is difference. There's cultural differences in language, but there's also a sameness within language. And I would say that there's certain facets of language, such as grammar, which stay the same.
Yeah.
But words change. My view is that words, the vocabulary, word meanings change, and of course we have different languages, and different meanings are evoked by the different words in different languages, but grammars stay the same. So within language there's difference and sameness. There's both.
Chomsky sets himself up as a grammarian,
yeah,
and there are actually other grammars. They're like the ritual of the Mass. That's part of the spiritual grammar, isn't it? You see what I mean? There are sort of like. Do you think there's some things that can't be spoken? Some cultural identities that actually surpass or maybe bypass?
I don't believe that. No, I don't believe that. I do believe that if you like the proof that grammar, the underlying nature of grammar is universal, is the same. It's simply that you can translate between languages. If grammars were totally unrecognisable from one to another, you would not be able to translate. You can translate. Yes. Most languages can be translated in and out of English. However, in translation, certain things are lost. And that is because of word meanings. Because word meanings, you cannot always express in your language everything you want to. So we often borrow expressions from other languages. So, for example, we will borrow languages from French. Sorry, we will borrow phrases from French and use them in English because we can't find the exact.
Like jardinière.
Yeah, or a certain je ne sais quoi, or a certain, you know, or there are certain expressions that we use from other languages that we import them because we can't get quite that meaning in our own language. So there is a problem sometimes with vocabulary being able to express everything. But I would say that grammar does, because if grammar didn't, languages would be unrecognisable. You would not be able to translate between German and French or Spanish and Italian. So there is a recognisable interface between all languages, and that's a Chomsky position. However, within that, there are rich variety and difference in vocabulary.
When you talk about identity, that might be the speaker's identity or the identities of the words themselves. Is that?
That is a very interesting point.
Is that pun intentional?
No. That is a very interesting statement that you've made, Simon, because words, and this is, I think, what I've already been saying, is that words can change meanings in terms of how they are expressed and by whom they are expressed. So people can use words to mean different things. So when you use a language, you incorporate those words in your own identity, and you use the words with the meaning that you give those words. So sometimes we change the meaning of a word as we use it. We don't always use it according to the standard dictionary. We use it according to how we think it should be used. So we can use words. We're not rushing to the dictionary all the time to check out if we use it. We use the words as we think the meaning.
That's part of the richness of the structure of language.
Yeah.
That anybody can dip their finger in the pool.
Well, yes. I think exactly as you said, Simon. There is a common pool of vocabulary, and we dip into that. We appropriate the words, and we have use the meaning as we think they should be. We don't always stick to the standard meaning. So words. So that's the reason. That's the reason why meanings change all the time, because people use words differently.
Because radio is really a celebration of the word.
Yes, absolutely.
And also the word has both visual and spoken components. How do you feel about the difference between spoken and written language? What stance do you take there? Well,
I think that spoken language is more immediate, isn't it? Spoken language lives the culture, or the diversity of culture, because of dialect, because of accent, because of local or social class phraseology. Spoken language tends to reflect a social position or a geographical position more readily. The written word tends to be more standardised. It doesn't have to be, but it does tend to be more set in stone. It doesn't change so quickly as the spoken word. So the spoken word contains more of the quick of life, the quickness of life, and the changeability of life, and the changeability of location and social class, much more than the written word, which I think is much more standardised.
Do you think language is essentially schizophrenic because it's about the mind looking at itself, and after a certain period it actually begins to break down?
Well, I just think, Simon, in that we can only analyse ourselves because we can only reflect upon ourselves because we have language. If we didn't, in a sense, we only know our own emotions, and we can only define our own emotions and think about ourselves and our place in life, in our own lives, because we possess language. We have language to look back at ourselves, which differentiates us from the cat or the dog, which doesn't have that facility. But we are in this position where we take language, we take phrases, and we use them to look back at ourselves. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to analyse ourselves or reflect upon ourselves.
Because language has changed now, because first of all we had printing, Caxton printing. Yeah. That was an implosion of language, and nowadays we've got computers.
Yeah.
the whole nature of how we identify ourselves has changed.
Yeah.
So this is probably where your book comes in as an important item.
For sure, that we're communicating all the time, and with communication comes a way of thinking about ourselves. And of course, the internet changes all the time. People communicate more rapidly. Sending emails. You don't hope you can send an email and not have much time to
what
think
do you
about
say? Do you say I send a letter or email? Do you say I'm going to email you something?
Yeah, I say email. Yeah. We're just talking about.
You're not writing to something.
No, but just coming back to what I said about the difference between spoken and written language.
Yeah.
And that written language tends to be more standardised. I think if you look at the modern media and texting, you'll see that language has evolved. Because people don't use standard language when they text. So spelling has changed. It's become more user friendly. A new vocabulary has emerged. So you have with texting a written language which is very close to the spoken language. So I think I'd have to add an amendment to what I just said when it comes to language over the modern media.
So you have a speaker, but he requires a listening ear, doesn't he?
Well, yeah, and in particular when we're talking about texting does tend to follow very close to the spoken word. And that's partly because people are sending text to each other with an immediacy. They're responding straight away. And that, therefore, has the quickness and the rapidity of the spoken word.
And why did you see the need to write your book?
Well, I think that, as I said before, I've spent a lot of my life learning and teaching language, and I wanted to write something which reflected upon language.
Something back in the pot, maybe?
Yeah, which had a view, a reflective view about language generally.
Was there a major collaboration with your
Yeah,
parents?
we had a team. There was a writing team. Obviously I wrote 3 chapters and edited, but there were several others in the writing team, and we all met and came to an agreement about the chapters we were going to write and how all the chapters would fit together. And also the themes of looking at some of the themes of renewing and revitalising marginalised language.
Did you rely a lot on trying to get together thoughts from other composers, other thinkers in the field of linguistics?
Well, I think we were very much a team that has done. I mean, the good thing about the team is, and writing an edited book, is that there are many other voices that come in. If you write your own book, it's just your voice all the way through. It's perhaps not so interesting as having a lot of other voices and a lot of other experience of different academic positions coming in.
What did your students say?
Well, it only had the book has only been published for 2 months, so I haven't had an awful lot of feedback from students, although I think students know it's in the library.
Was it fun to write?
It was fun to write. It was, but it was also stressful because it was a question of pulling a team together, and sometimes people had an awful lot of other work to do.
That's academia for you, isn't it?
Yeah, people were under pressure for marking, teaching, and therefore I felt as adding to their burden. But generally, everything came out in the end, and I certainly enjoyed it, and I'm just looking forward to doing another book in my retirement, semi-retirement.
So, whom would you say especially supported you?
Well, I think I had a good team. I had a good team of writers. and I think we were all supportive towards each other. I think it was a great team of writers. We also had some very senior academics, and I've spent a lot of my life as a school teacher, so I wouldn't describe myself. I describe myself more as a school teacher than a senior academic, but we had two very senior academics who hold professorships, and they were able to give me a lot of good advice.
Before we come to an end, is there anything else you'd like to say for the minute to our radio people?
Well, I'd just say that become interested in the way language works. You know, you use language all the time. I use language all the time. It's good, I think, to stand back and think, well, what is this that I'm using? How does it come about? How does my language change as I go from one? Most of us within our own language use different registers. We don't even realise it. You know, we might speak in a very relaxed way, but as soon as we go into maybe a formal situation or an interview, then we use a different register. Once we pick the phone up to speak to someone we don't know, we use a different register. We become all posh, or we become very mindful of each word we're using. And then, once we put the phone down, we go back into a more of a vernacular. So we're using language all the time in different ways, and sometimes we don't realise it. So it's good to actually
mirror your identity, really.
We're changing, yeah, exactly, Simon. We're changing identities, or even through the day as we use different registers of our own language. We use different Englishes, and we're changing identities with that.
Are there any other books that people could follow up with?
Well, I think just wait for my next book to come out.
Oh, that's right. Anyway, Dr. David Evans' book came out a couple of months ago, and there is a copy available at Dover Library, but you will have to hurry to get there first. The book's title is Language and Discourse, published by the Bloomsbury Press. And a very big thank you to Dr. David Evans for speaking with us today on Dover Community Radio. Thank you very much and for being with us and giving us all those precious comments.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you, Dave.